Welcome back, everyone. We got a really interesting book from one of you, The Courage to be Disliked.
Yeah, this one really digs into some fascinating ideas about personal growth and the philosophies behind it.
It does, and we're going to really try to pull out the most useful, actionable stuff from it during this deep dive.
Exactly. So you can see how these concepts can actually make a difference in how you understand yourself and your relationships.
Right. So, our mission for today is to unpack the core principles of Adlerian psychology, which is what the book's all about.
And we want to see how those principles can affect your daily life.
Exactly. So, to jump right in, the book starts with a pretty thought-provoking
Oh,
question.
yeah.
It asks, have you ever considered that you might have more power to change your life than you think just by changing how you see things?
Oh,
Right. And to kind of get at that, it introduces this idea of teleology.
teleology.
Yeah, and I was wondering if you could maybe explain what that is and how it's different from how we usually think about what motivates us.
Sure. So teleology is kind of a shift in perspective.
Hmm.
Instead of focusing on the past like we usually do when trying to figure out why we are the way we are,
Right.
teleology looks forward. It says that the things we do in the present are actually driven by the goals we want to achieve in the future.
Okay, so it's less about looking back and more about looking forward.
Yeah, exactly. And the book uses this really interesting example to illustrate it.
What's that?
It talks about a friend who basically shuts himself in his room, becomes kind of a recluse.
Okay, I've known a few people like that.
Right. Now, typically, we might try to understand this behavior by looking for some past trauma or some difficult experience.
Right, like what happened to make them this way?
Yeah. But the Adlerian approach, as the book explains it, says that the goal of this person is actually not going out.
Not going out.
Yeah. And the anxiety and fear they might feel are actually tools they're using, maybe without even realizing it, to
Okay.
achieve that goal.
Okay, so it's like their anxiety is almost helping them avoid going out?
In a way, yes. Maybe they're getting attention from their parents by staying in, or maybe they're avoiding some kind of social discomfort they associate with the outside world.
That's really interesting. So even something like anxiety, which feels completely out of our control, could actually be serving a purpose.
Exactly. And the book takes it even further, talking about emotions like anger.
Oh, yeah, that was a big one.
It was.
Yeah.
And it proposes that even anger isn't just a spontaneous reaction, but a tool we use sometimes to get something we want.
Okay, so like when someone yells at you, it's not just because they're mad. There's something else going on.
Right. Maybe they're trying to win an argument, or they're trying to gain power in a situation.
Like if you think about someone shouting in anger, they're often trying to intimidate the other person or get them to listen.
Exactly. And I think this is where the young man in the book really starts pushing back against the philosopher. And it's a point that a lot of people might find challenging.
Yeah, it definitely made me stop and think because it almost felt like it was invalidating my emotions.
Right, like it's saying they're not real or something.
Yeah, but then the book goes on to talk about how we interpret past events and how that shapes our present, even more than the events themselves.
Right, and it uses that really clever analogy of the well water.
Oh, yeah, that one was good. Can you remind us about that?
Sure, so the analogy is that the water in the well is always about 60 degrees, right?
Okay.
But in the summer, when it's hot outside, that 60-degree water feels really refreshing and cool.
Right.
But then in the winter, when it's freezing, that same 60-degree water feels relatively warm.
Interesting.
So the point is, the water itself hasn't changed, but our experience of it changes based on the context.
I get it.
And the book says it's the same with past events. Like, let's say your parents got divorced when you were a kid.
Okay.
That event itself is a fact. It happened.
Right.
But the meaning you attach to it, the way you felt about it, and how you processed it,
Yeah.
that's what really affects you today.
So it's not the divorce itself that's shaping my life now, but how I thought about it and how it made me feel.
Exactly. And the important takeaway here is that you have the power to reevaluate those interpretations, those meanings you've assigned to past events.
Wow, that's pretty powerful. And then the book goes on to make this claim that we basically choose our lifestyle early in life, like around 10 years old.
Yeah, that's a big one.
It is.
Yeah.
What exactly does that mean?
So the book says that by the time we're about 10, we've pretty much solidified our basic patterns of thinking and behaving.
Okay.
And they call this our lifestyle.
Our lifestyle.
Yeah. And even though it's influenced by our upbringing and environment, the book argues that it's ultimately a choice we make.
So even at that young age, we're already making choices about how we see the world and how we act in it.
Yeah. And the book emphasizes that this choice happens largely unconsciously.
Unconsciously.
Yeah, we're not really aware of it at the time.
Yeah.
But this chosen lifestyle then becomes like a filter through which we experience everything.
That's fascinating. And I think this ties into how we experience feelings of inferiority, which is something the book talks about quite a bit.
It does. And it makes a really important distinction between objective lack and subjective feeling.
Okay, break that down for me.
So the book gives the example of the philosopher himself. He says he's 61 inches tall, which is shorter than average.
Okay.
Now, objectively, that's just a fact. He's shorter than some people.
Right.
But the book argues that it's not inherently a sign of being inferior.
Just because he's shorter.
Exactly. It's the meaning we attach to that height, the comparison we make to others, that creates the feeling of inferiority.
So it's not the height itself, but how we feel about it.
Exactly. It's a personal interpretation, not a universal truth.
That's a really important point. So much of how we feel about ourselves is based on how we compare ourselves to others.
It is. And that tendency to compare ourselves can lead to what the book calls the life lie.
The life lie. What's that about?
Well, the book says that we often convince ourselves that there are external reasons why we can't do something or achieve something.
Like making excuses.
Kind of, yeah. It's like we're trying to avoid confronting our own perceived shortcomings.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Like someone might say, I'm just not talented enough to be a musician.
Oh.
But maybe they're just scared of putting in the effort or being vulnerable enough to try.
Right.
So they use their perceived lack of talent as an excuse not to even try.
That makes sense. So the life lie is basically a way of protecting ourselves from failure.
In a way, yes.
Yeah.
But the book encourages us to question those limitations we put on ourselves, those excuses we make.
Because often they're not really true.
Exactly. And then the book connects these feelings of inferiority to the development of an inferiority complex and even a superiority complex, which seems kind of contradictory.
Yeah, how can you feel both inferior and superior at the same time?
Right. It's weird. So the book explains that the inferiority complex is essentially a way of avoiding responsibility.
Oh, so.
It's like saying, if only this external factor were different, then I could succeed.
So blaming something else for your own inaction.
Exactly. And then the superiority complex, which often manifests as boasting or arrogance, is actually a way of masking those feelings of inferiority.
So it's like overcompensating.
Yeah. People who constantly need to prove they're better than others are often deeply insecure and trying to convince themselves, as much as everyone else, of their worth.
It's like they're trying to hide their own feelings of inadequacy.
Exactly. And then the book makes this really interesting point about how weakness can sometimes be a form of power in our relationships with others.
Oh, yeah, I remember that. That was a bit of a head-scratcher.
It was. But if you think about it, like a baby who's completely helpless and dependent on others,
Right.
that vulnerability actually gives the baby a certain kind of power because people are naturally drawn to care for them.
That's true. We can't help but want to help a baby.
Right. And the book suggests that sometimes in our adult relationships, what seems like weakness or dependence can be a subtle way of influencing others or getting them to take care of us.
I never thought of it that way.
It's a complex dynamic, but it shows how much our relationships with others can affect us.
And that leads us to that really big statement from the book. All problems are interpersonal relationship problems.
Yep, that's a bold one.
It is. Is it really true that all our problems come from our relationships with others?
Well, the book argues that a lot of our anxieties and struggles stem from how we interact with other people.
Okay.
And it introduces this concept of the separation of tasks as a key to navigating those
It's a
relationships.
separation of tasks.
Yeah. So can you explain what that means and why it's so important?
Sure. So the basic idea is to draw a clear line between what you can control and what you can't.
Okay.
Your tasks are your responsibilities, and other people's tasks are their own, including their feelings and choices.
Right.
Like the book gives the example of parents who disapprove of your career choice.
Yeah.
Their disapproval is their problem, not yours.
Their task, not yours.
Right, it's their emotional reaction, and
Yeah.
you can't control that or fix it for them.
Exactly. And trying to do so can actually be harmful to the relationship.
How so?
Well, imagine parents who constantly try to micromanage their adult child's life.
Oh, I know a few people like that.
Right. Even if they're doing it out of love, they're overstepping boundaries and preventing their child from learning and growing on their own.
That makes sense. So
Yeah.
by not trying to control other people's emotions or take on their responsibilities, we actually give ourselves more freedom.
Exactly. When you're not constantly worried about what other people think or feel, you free up a lot of mental and emotional energy.
And that ties into why the book says we shouldn't seek constant recognition from others.
It does. Why do you think that's so important?
Well, the book says that when we live our lives trying to please others and get their approval, we're essentially giving them power over us.
Power over us.
Yeah, we become less focused on our own values and more focused on what others expect of us.
Like we're letting them decide our worth.
Exactly. And the example the book uses is picking up litter. If you're only picking it up to get praise from someone, what happens when no one notices?
You stop doing it.
Exactly. But if you're doing it because you believe it's the right thing to do, regardless of who sees it, then your motivation comes from within.
And that's where true fulfillment comes from.
Right. And that leads us to the concept of community feeling, which is a big part of Adlerian psychology.
It is. Can you explain what that means?
So, community feeling is basically a deep sense of belonging, like feeling like it's okay to be here in this world.
Okay.
And it's built on three pillars: self-acceptance, confidence in others, and contributing to others.
Those are big ones.
They are. And the book makes it clear that confidence in others doesn't mean blindly trusting everyone.
Right. That would be naive.
It's more about believing in their inherent worth and potential as fellow human beings.
Like seeing them as comrades in life.
Exactly. It's about having faith in people, even knowing that they might sometimes make mistakes or disappoint us.
That's a tough one, but it's important.
It is. And then the third pillar is contributing to others, which might sound like we have to do grand gestures or sacrifice ourselves.
Yeah, like we have to be heroes or something.
Right. But the book actually says that's not what it's about.
So what is it about then?
It's about doing things, even small things, that benefit the community around us.
Okay.
And by doing so, we gain a sense of our own worth, like feeling useful and valued.
So it's not about self-sacrifice, but about finding our place in the world and contributing to something bigger than ourselves.
Exactly. And this can be through our work, our relationships, or even just helping out around the house.
It's about making a positive impact however we can.
And this is where the idea of horizontal relationships comes in.
Horizontal relationship.
Yeah. So the book argues that we should strive for relationships based on equality, where we treat each other as peers.
Instead of the usual hierarchy where one person is superior and the other is inferior.
Right. And in these horizontal relationships, encouragement replaces praise.
Encouragement instead of praise.
Yeah, because praise implies judgment from a higher position.
I never thought of that.
But encouragement, like expressing gratitude or simply saying thank you, is about recognizing someone's efforts without judgment.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
And the book also makes this really profound point about how we can feel a sense of worth simply by existing, just by being alive.
Yeah. It uses the example of a mother who's been in an accident and can't actively care for her child.
Okay.
But her very existence is still deeply meaningful to her child.
That's true.
So it's not just about what we do or achieve, but about who we are.
That's a powerful message. And finally, the book talks about the importance of living in the here and now.
Yes, this idea of energial life versus kinetic life.
That was a really interesting distinction. Can you explain it?
So kinetic life is all about striving towards a future goal. Like we're always chasing something.
Okay.
But energial life is about finding fulfillment in the present moment, in the process itself.
So it's not about the destination, but the journey.
Exactly. Like think about dancing. Yeah. The real joy of dancing comes from the act of dancing itself, not just from reaching the end of the song.
Okay, I see what you mean.
And the book says life is like that. It's a series of moments to be lived fully and earnestly, not just a race to the finish line.
So we should focus on enjoying each moment rather than always looking ahead to the future.
Exactly. And by doing so, we might actually find that the meaning of life becomes much clearer.
Because meaning isn't something we find in the future, but something we create in the present.
Right. And the book concludes by saying that true happiness can be found right now through this feeling of contribution and connection.
And that the desire for recognition from others is often a misguided attempt to achieve that happiness.
Exactly. So as we wrap up this deep dive, what are the key insights you're taking away from The Courage to Be Disliked?
Well, for me, it's the power of choice, how our goals drive our actions, even if we're not aware of it.
And how feelings of inferiority are really just subjective interpretations, not objective truths.
Right. And the importance of separating our tasks from others in our relationships.
And finding belonging through contributing to our communities.
And embracing the present moment, finding joy in the here and now.
Absolutely. Those are all incredibly valuable takeaways.
And remember, this is just a starting point.
Yeah, there's so much more to explore in the book.
We encourage you to keep reflecting on these ideas and see how they apply to your own life.
And on that note, here's a final thought to ponder. If you truly embraced the idea that you're not the center of the universe and focused your energy on what you can contribute to the world around you, how might your life change?
That's a great question.
It is, and we'd love to hear your thoughts on it. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
We're always excited to see where your continued learning and exploration takes you.
Until next time.
See you then.